Good morning and welcome to the 18th meeting in 2025 of the Local Government Housing and Planning Committee, and I remind all members and witnesses to ensure that their devices are on silent. We've had apologies from Fulton McGregor MSP, and Colette Stevenson MSP is joining us online as his substitute. I advise members and those present that I will be leaving the meeting ahead of item 3, and the Deputy Convener will convene the meeting from that point. I have to go and move amendments in the land reform, stage 2. The first item on our agenda is to decide whether to take item 5 in private. Are members agreed? The second item on our agenda is consideration of the Housing Scotland Bill at stage 2, day 7, and I welcome the Cabinet Secretary for Social Justice and her officials. Members wishing to speak should indicate that by catching my or the clerk's attention, and voting is by a show of hands, and it's important the members keep their hands raised clearly until the clerk has recorded their names. And we will now begin. I call amendments 445 in my name, grouped with amendments 554, 447 and 562. Myself to move amendments 445 and speak to all amendments in the group. So I move amendment 445. This amendment is around co-housing guidance, and as well as making homes more accessible to more people, through NPF4 we are committed to creating space for placemaking. And co-housing is a housing and placemaking model well suited to support us in this endeavour. It offers communities and local authorities the opportunity to come together to not only meet housing needs, but also provide a neighbourly place where people can engage with and support one another and can create a space that meets everyone's requirements. And this housing approach, which is mainstreamed in local housing provision in Denmark, is gathering growing interest in Scotland. Amendment 445 and its consequential 447 seek to support this enthusiasm and positive potential by creating a basis for which co-housing can be scaled up. Co-housing has a lot to offer. For example, it has been shown to prevent social isolation and poor health outcomes that go with it. If we can nurture and grow this model, we can move to a happier, healthier society where people's housing needs are met, where people have a real stake in the places where they live, and where neighbourhoods become vibrant, all of which can reduce the strain on public services. When we've spoken about co-housing, the Housing Minister has been enthusiastic about the possibilities the model offers. There has been Scottish Government work led on co-housing in previous sessions, but unfortunately it wasn't prioritised. My amendment, which is backed by Co-Housing Scotland, aims to ensure that the work is taken forward, and it would require ministers to both consult on and produce guidance for co-housing. And this guidance would allow the sector to grow. And I'd be keen to hear from the Cabinet Secretary what assurances she can provide to ensure that stakeholders will be supported by the government to do the work necessary to develop a Scottish co-housing model so we can see a co-housing sector emerging in Scotland in the next few years. My amendments 554 and its consequential 562 would create a housing cooperative advisory function, along with the financial barriers of LBTT and ADS that I spoke about in one of our previous stage 2 meetings. Another barrier facing housing cooperatives in Scotland is a lack of access to official advice. I've been working with the Edinburgh Student Housing Cooperative on this. This housing co-op supports students to access affordable quality accommodation in a location that's become unaffordable for many. In seeking support on tax and governance issues, the co-op has been passed around various public bodies and organisations without getting the answers it needs to thrive. What I've proposed in Amendment 554 and its consequential is the establishment of an advisory function within an existing housing or land-related body, and this function would be staffed by 1 or 2 full-time individuals and would support existing co-ops with tax and governance issues, and would also help those wanting to set up a housing co-op. Cooperatives should be a flourishing housing model in Scotland They bring a wide range of benefits, and where they serve communities of the elderly, they can help councils save money on social care, and those that provide student accommodation can ensure people from all economic backgrounds can access higher education in places where accommodation is difficult to find and often unaffordable, making it easier for these co-ops to be established and to function will help to reduce the financial burden on government budgets. During our pre-stage 2 discussions, it was good to hear from the Cabinet Secretary about her involvement and appreciation of the cooperative movement. And from this, I know she is sympathetic to the aims of this amendment, which is why I'd be keen to hear what assurances she can give that the government will provide more support to housing co-ops before deciding on whether to move or not move these amendments. Would anyone else like to speak in this grouping? No. Cabinet Secretary.
Thank you and good morning again, Convener. Amendments 445 and 447 in your name would require the Scottish Ministers to publish guidance on co-housing within 24 months of the bill receiving royal assent. Scottish Ministers would require to define co-housing via regulations and would require to consult on the preparation of this guidance. There is no need for a statutory obligation on Scottish Ministers to publish guidance. Scottish Ministers could publish guidance on this issue without a statutory duty to do so, and that's what I commit to doing today. I would therefore ask you, Convener, not to press this amendment and instead work with me on this issue with a view to producing Scottish Government guidance on co-housing. Turning to Amendments 554 and 562, these would give the Scottish Ministers a power to designate a public body to carry out a range of functions that would support those who want to progress a cooperative housing approach. Housing cooperatives are already a valued part of the social housing sector in Scotland, alongside other community-based social landlords and local authority landlords. And whilst I understand the desire to support developing the housing cooperative model as part of creating a diverse housing sector in Scotland, I do have concerns in relation to the amendments as set out. Obliging a public body to provide financial, tax or litigation advice would not be appropriate, and a housing cooperative acting on the advice of the designated body could seek redress against that body if that advice causes the cooperative to suffer a loss. In addition, acting as a guarantor against demutualisation could open the designating body up to significant financial and legal risks. It is not clear how the designated body could, or indeed whether they should, be able to prevent demutualisation if the cooperative members vote for it. And in terms of promoting cooperative housing, the cooperative model itself, along with
certainly on that, yeah, just I'd be interested to understand then if this is not if this amendment isn't appropriate in terms of designating a public body to give tax and governance advice, what could we do in order to support housing cooperatives?
Well, I do very much recognise the point she made in your remarks, Convener, about certain cooperatives struggling to receive advice or support, whether that's through public agencies or elsewhere. And I do think there is a discussion to be had, as I've had with yourself and indeed Paul Sweeney, over the importance of housing cooperatives and the encouragement indeed of housing cooperatives. So I would be more than happy to discuss what else could be done to support the housing cooperative movement to ensure that we can protect, support and encourage those that are already housing cooperatives, as well as encourage the housing cooperative model to be developed still further. But I'm afraid, Convener, I would ask members not to vote for the amendments in front of them today.
Okay. And now I call myself to wind up, press or withdraw Amendment 445. So on the Scottish co-housing model, it's welcome to hear that the Cabinet Secretary is committing to produce guidance for co-housing in Scotland. And I would add that something that's come through clearly from talking to stakeholders is the desire for them to be facilitated in that process. So something about, rather than the government leading and going away and doing it, a collaborative process, co-design, where members of Co-Housing Scotland but other stakeholders are very much involved in that process would be welcome. And in terms of the amendment around the advisory body for cooperatives, It's been interesting to hear the Cabinet Secretary's concerns around obliging public bodies to give that kind of advice, and I welcome the opportunity to take forward a discussion on what we can do to support the co-housing, the housing cooperative movement in Scotland at as soon as possible. So with that, the question is that Amendment 445 be agreed. No, I'm not moving it, right? So I'm going to withdraw amendment. So myself to withdraw Amendment 445. Ariane Burgess seeks to withdraw Amendment 445. Does any member object? No one objects. Therefore, the amendment is withdrawn. This is going to be a bit confusing, having to call on myself a lot. Okay. I call Amendment 477 in the name of Paul Sweeney, already debated with Amendment 257. And I believe, Mark Griffin, you're going to be working on that amendment.
Not moved, Convener.
Not moved, thank you. I call Amendment 515 in the name of Maggie Chapman, already debated with Amendment... Oh, gosh, I don't know what I'm doing with that one. That's not moved. I call Amendment 515 in the name of Maggie Chapman, already debated with Amendment 223. And I'm going to be moving amendments for Maggie Chapman and Ross Greer, so I don't know what this one is. I'm sorry, I don't know. I'm not sure what I'm supposed to do on this one. Hang on a minute. Just... I'm going to move that amendment. I've got to check that. The question is that Amendment 515 be agreed. Are we all agreed?
No.
We're not agreed. There will be a division. All those in favour of Amendment 515? All those against? The result on the division on Amendment 515 is 2-4, 5 against. The amendment has been disagreed. I call Amendment 490 in the name of Daniel Johnson, already debated with Amendment 257. Mark Griffin, to move or not move?
Not moved.
I call Amendment 516 in the name of Megan Gallagher, already debated with Amendment 257. Megan Gallagher, to move or not move?
Not moved.
I call Amendment 550 in the name of Ross Greer. Already debated with Amendment 519, and I'm going to move that. Amendment. The question is that Amendment 550 be agreed. Are we all agreed?
No.
We're not agreed. There will be a division. All those in favour of Amendment 550? All those against? Result, the division on Amendment 550 is 1-4, 6 against. The amendment has been disagreed. I call Amendment 552 in the name of Jamie Halco Johnson, already debated with Amendment 257. Megan Gallagher, to move or not move? The question is that Amendment 552 be agreed. Are we all agreed?
No.
We're not agreed. There will be a division. All those in favour of Amendment 552? All those against? The result of the division on Amendment 552 is 2-4, 5 against. The amendment has been disagreed. I call Amendment 553 in my name, already debated with Amendment 223, and I'm not going to move that. I call Amendment 554 in my name, already debated with Amendment 445, and I'm not going to move that. I call Amendment 271 in the name of Mark Griffin, already debated with Amendment 458. Mark Griffin, to move or not move?
Not move.
I call Amendment 272 in the name of Mark Griffin, already debated with Amendment 458. Mark Griffin, to move or not move?
Not moved.
I call Amendment 470 in the name of Pam Duncan Glancy, already debated with Amendment 257. Mark Griffin, to move or not move?
Not moved.
I call Amendment 471 in the name of Pam Duncan Glancy, already debated with Amendment 257. Mark Griffin, to move or not move?
Not moved.
I call Amendment 472 in the name of Pam Duncan Glancy, already debated with Amendment 257. Mark Griffin, to move or not move?
Not moved.
I call Amendment 473 in the name of Pam Duncan Glancy, already debated with Amendment 257. Mark Griffin, to move or not move?
Not moved.
I call Amendment 551 in the name of Pam Duncan Glancy, already debated with Amendment 257. Mark Griffin, to move or not move?
Not moved.
I call Amendment 474 in the name of Pam Duncan Glancy, already debated with Amendment 51. Mark Griffin, to move or not move?
Not moved.
I call Amendment 475 in the name of Pam Duncan Glancy, already debated with Amendment 51. Mark Griffin, to move or not move?
Not moved.
I call Amendment 548 in the name of Ross Greer, already debated with Amendment 51, and I'm not going to move that. I call Amendment 549 in the name of Ross Greer, already debated with Amendment 51, and I'm not going to move that. I call Amendment 226 in the name of Rachel Hamilton, already debated with Amendment 70, Alexander Stewart, to move or not move?
Move, convener.
Moved. Okay. We'll break in the rhythm. The question is that Amendment 226 be agreed. Are we all agreed?
No.
We are not agreed. There will be a division. All those in favour of Amendment 226? All those against? The result of the division on Amendment 226 is 3-4, 4 against. The amendment has been agreed. I call Amendment... Sorry, yeah. Okay, I'm going to just say that again. The result of the division on Amendment 226 is 4-4, 3 against. The amendment has been agreed. I call Amendment 256 in the name of Pam Gosal, already debated with Amendment 1, Alexander Stewart, to move or not move?
Not move.
I call Amendment 555 in the name of Jamie Halcott Johnson, already debated with Amendment 257, Megan Gallagher, to move or not move?
Not moved.
I call Amendment 441 in the name of Edward Mountain, already debated with Amendment 51, Megan Gallagher, to move or not move?
Moved.
Say again?
Moved.
Moved. The question is that Amendment 441 be agreed. Are we all agreed?
No.
We're not agreed. There will be a division. All those in favour of Amendment 441? All those against? The result of the division on Amendment 441 is 3-4, 4 against. The amendment has been disagreed. I call Amendment 393 in the name of the Minister, already debated with Amendment 281, Cabinet Secretary, to move formally.
Moved.
The question is that Amendment 393 be agreed. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
Yes. I call Amendment 394 in the name of the Minister, already debated with Amendment 303, Cabinet Secretary, to move formally.
Moved.
The question is that Amendment 394 be agreed. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
I call Amendment 75 in the name of Graham Simpson, already debated with Amendment 51, Megan Gallagher, to move or not move.
Not moved.
I call Amendment 185 in the name of Maggie Chapman, already debated with Amendment 148, and I am not going to move that. I call Amendment 426 in the name of Maggie Chapman, already debated with Amendment 148, and I am not going to move that. I call Amendment 76 in the name of Graham Simpson, already debated with Amendment 70. Megan Gallagher, to move or not move?
Not moved.
I call Amendment 195 in the name of Ross Greer, already debated with Amendment 73, and I'm not going to move that. I call Amendment 556 in the name of Pam Duncan Glancy, already debated with Amendment 51. Mark Griffin, to move or not move?
Not moved.
I call Amendment 446 in the name of Graham Simpson, already debated with Amendment 257. Megan Gallagher, to move or not move?
Not moved.
I call Amendment 557 in my name, already debated with 257, and I am not going to move that. I call Amendment 558 in my name, already debated with Amendment 257, and I am not going to move that. I call Amendment 23 in the name of Murdo Fraser, already debated with Amendment 386. Megan Gallagher, to move or not move?
Not moved.
I call Amendment 517 in my name, already debated with 507, and I'm not going to move. I call Amendment 518 in my name, already debated with Amendment 507, and I'm not going to move that. I call Amendment 478 in the name of Ross Greer, already debated with Amendment 519, and I am not moving that. I call Amendment 277 in the name of Mark Griffin, already debated with Amendment 223. Mark Griffin, to move or not move?
Moved.
The question is that Amendment 277 be agreed. Are we all agreed?
No.
We're not agreed. There will be a division. All those in favour of Amendment 277? Those against? The result of the division on Amendment 277 is 4 3 against. The amendment has been agreed. I call Amendment 447 in my name, already debated with Amendment 445, and I won't move that. I call Amendment 479 in the name of Paul Sweeney, already debated with Amendment 257. Mark Griffin, to move or not move?
Not moved.
I call Amendment 562 in my name, already debated with Amendment 445. And I am not going to move that. I call Amendment 561 in the name of Pam Duncan Glancy, already debated with Amendment 257. Mark Griffin, to move or not move?
Not moved.
I call Amendment 559 in the name of Ross Greer, already debated with Amendment 51, and I am not going to move that. I call Amendment 560 in the name of Ross Greer, already debated with Amendment 51, and I am not moving that. The question is that Section 52 be agreed. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
The question is that Section 53, 54 and 55 be agreed. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
I call Amendment 199 in the name of Maggie Chapman, already debated with Amendment 148. And I am not going to... Oh, actually, I'm going to move that one. I'm going to move it. Sorry, lots of pages. The question is that Amendment 199 be agreed. Are we all agreed?
No.
We're not agreed. There will be a division. All those in favour of Amendment 199? All those against? The result of the division on Amendment 199 is 1-4-6 against. The amendment has been disagreed. I call Amendment 200 in the name of Maggie Chapman, already debated with Amendment 119, and I am going to move that one. Lots of pages. 91. Thank you. The question is that Amendment 200 be agreed. Are we all agreed?
No.
We're not agreed. There will be a division. All those in favour of Amendment 200? All those against? Thanks. The result of the divisions on Amendment 200 is 2-4-5 against. The amendment has been disagreed. I call Amendment 395 in the name of the Minister, already debated with Amendment 119. Cabinet Secretary, to move formally.
Moved.
The question is that Amendment 395 be agreed. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
I call Amendment 563 in the name of Emma Roddick, already debated with Amendment 522. Emma Roddick to move or not move?
Not moved.
I call Amendments 396, 397, 398, 399, 400 and 401, all in the name of the Minister, all previously debated, and I invite the Cabinet Secretary to move Amendments 396 to 301 on block. 396 to 401 on block.
Moved on block.
Does any member object to a single question being put on Amendments 396 to 401?
No.
The question is that Amendments 396 to 401 be agreed. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
I call Amendment 266 in the name of Maggie Chapman, already debated with Amendment 214, and I am not going to move that. I call Amendment 402 in the name of the Minister, already debated with Amendment 281. Cabinet Secretary to move formally.
Moved.
The question is that Amendment 402 be agreed. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
No. We are not agreed. There will be a division. All those in favour of Amendment 402? I'm going to abstain. All those against? And abstentions? The result of the division on Amendment 402 is 6 for and 1 abstention. The amendment has been agreed. I call Amendment 410 in the name of Maggie Chapman, already debated with Amendment 281, and I am not going to move that. I call Amendment 77 in the name of Graham Simpson, already debated with Amendment 281. Megan Gallagher, to move or not move?
Not moved.
I call Amendment 227 in the name of Rachel Hamilton, already debated with Amendment 29. Alexander Stewart, to move or not move?
Not moved, Convener.
I call Amendment 228 in the name of Rachel Hamilton, already debated with Amendment 218. Alexander Stewart, to move or not move?
Not moved.
I call Amendment 267 in the name of Maggie Chapman, already debated with Amendment 257, and I am not moving that. I call Amendment 403 in the name of the Minister, already debated with Amendment 408. Cabinet Secretary to move formally.
Moved.
The question is that Amendment 403 be agreed. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
I call Amendment 404 in the name of the Minister, already debated with Amendment 119. Cabinet Secretary to move formally.
Moved.
The question is that Amendment 404 be agreed. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
I call Amendment 564 in the name of Emma Roddick, already debated with Amendment 522. Emma Roddick, to move or not move?
Not moved.
I call Amendment 50 in the name of Ben McPherson, already debated with Amendment 281. Mark Griffin, to move or not move? What did I say?
You said Mark. It would be
Oh, sorry. It's one of you.
Not moved.
Sorry, Mark. Okay. Willie Coffey, to move or not move? Not moved. I call Amendment 7, I don't know. Suddenly put him in the wrong party. I call Amendment 78 in the name of Graham Simpson, already debated with Amendment 281. Megan Gallagher, to move or not move?
Not moved.
I call Amendment 79 in the name of Graham Simpson, already debated with Amendment 281. Megan Gallagher, to move or not move?
Not moved.
I call Amendment 80 in the name of Graham Simpson, already debated with Amendment 281. Megan Gallagher, to move or not move?
Not moved.
I call Amendment 405 in the name of the Minister, already debated with Amendment 408. Cabinet Secretary to move formally.
Moved.
The question is that Amendment 405 be agreed. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
I call Amendment 406 in the name of the Minister, already debated with Amendment 281. Cabinet Secretary to move formally.
Moved.
The question is that Amendment 406 be agreed. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
Just checking that. 06. No, we're not agreed. There will be a division. All those in favour of Amendment 406? All those against? The result of the division on Amendment 406 is 6-4, 1 against. The amendment has been agreed. The question is that the schedule be agreed to. Are we agreed? Yes. I call Amendment 196 in the name of Maggie Chapman, already debated with Amendment 148, and I am not moving that. I call Amendment 197 in the name of Ross Greer, already debated with Amendment 519, and I am not moving that. I call Amendment 198 in the name of Ross Greer, already debated with Amendment 519, and I am not moving that. And now we're going to move on to the next grouping, which is homelessness prevention commencement. Who's doing that? Okay. I call Amendment 230 in the name of Bob Doris in a group on its own, and I believe that Emma Roddick is going to move and speak to Amendment 230.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Convener. And I move Amendment 230 in the name of Bob Doris. I know that Bob Doris has been encouraged by the strength of support from stakeholders and from members of the Social Justice and Social Security Committee for the homelessness preventions in Part 5 of the bill, which will significantly improve our ability to prevent people from reaching that point in a housing crisis. And I want to recognise that Bob Doris's and the committee's work so far has already had a hugely positive impact on the bill and those it seeks to help. The timing of the introduction of new prevention measures is important, especially when homelessness services are stretched. The Christie report challenged us over a decade ago to shift towards prevention and longer-term outcomes, but unless we get better at preventing households from becoming homeless, it will be challenging to resolve the current housing emergency. Amendment 230 on the commencement of Part 5 of the bill is informed by discussions with experts in the homelessness sector, particularly Crisis. Officers at Crisis shared that they recognise that duty bearers need adequate time to prepare for the new legislation, but wish to ensure that implementation remains a priority for the government. So this amendment recognises both of those points and provides a 3-year backstop for the commencement of the homelessness prevention provisions in Part 5. The amendment would ensure that if any of those provisions have not been commenced within 3 years, they will come into force. The inclusion of this backstop will help to reassure stakeholders that steps will be taken to implement these provisions within this period, allowing us to build on the goodwill from stakeholders in moving to a more proactive homelessness prevention. The amendment allows time to work closely with stakeholders, including named relevant bodies, to ensure that any new regulations on the operation of Ask and Act, regulations supported by members of the Social Justice and Social Security Committee, are fit for purpose. It also provides scope to work with stakeholders on the guidance required and to identify training needs. I know that effective prevention work is already happening, and this includes the homelessness prevention pilots supported by Scottish Government funding, which I understand will begin very shortly and will help to understand how Ask and Act will work in practice. Now, there is cross-party consensus that making homelessness prevention everybody's business is the right thing to do, and we don't want to lose that positive momentum. And I therefore urge members to support Amendment 230 in the name of Bob Doris. Thank you.
And would any other members wish to speak? Duncan Gallagher.
Thank you. On this amendment, if I could raise the concerns that were raised in the Social Justice Committee, because this was an amendment that we were considering as part of a series of other amendments submitted by other colleagues in the Social Justice Committee, and we had to wait until the Local Government Housing and Planning Committee before we were able to accept and hear the debate surrounding the amendment submitted by Bob Doris. You know, I fully support the amendment that's been brought forward today, but I do have to question the process, given that this wasn't considered as part of the homelessness prevention work that had been undertaken by the Social Justice Committee. So I think that's more of a reflective comment than it is anything else, but I'm glad that we're here now and we're able to discuss this. But it's been a very long time coming, and it's not been good for stakeholder morale in terms of the direction in which this Parliament is going, having to wait so long before we're able to hear this amendment today. Thank you.
Thank you. Cabinet Secretary.
Convener, I support Amendment 230 in the name of Bob Doris. It provides a 3-year backstop for the commencement of the homelessness prevention provisions in Part 5 of the bill. I believe this amendment allows us to maintain progress towards these important new duties while allowing time to develop the appropriate regulations, guidance and training in partnership with stakeholders and people with lived experience to support successful implementation. Crucially, it also allows us to implement the learning from the Scottish Government's homelessness prevention pilots welcomed by Crisis, Homelessness Network Scotland and other stakeholders. Our £4 million investment in the pilots will demonstrate how the Bill's new Ask and Act duties will work in reality. I've been clear that we do not need to wait for the new duties to be formally commenced before we see improved cooperation and early intervention to prevent homelessness, but I'm happy to support Amendment 230.
Thank you. Emma Roddick to wind up and press or withdraw Amendment 230.
Thank you, Convener. I think I've covered everything we needed to say, and I'm happy to press.
The question is that Amendment 230 be agreed. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
We're agreed. The question is that Section 56 be agreed. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
The question is that Section 57 be agreed. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
The question is that the long title be agreed. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
And that ends Stage 2 consideration of the bill. So I wish to thank members, the Cabinet Secretary and your officials, and we are now going to suspend for 5 minutes to allow for a changeover of witnesses. Thank you.
Welcome back, everyone. The next item on the agenda is to take evidence as part of our annual review of the operation of the 4th National Planning Framework. We are joined for this item in the room by Esme Cleland, Senior Conservation Planner for the RSPB and Convener of the Planning Group Scottish Environment Link, and Kevin Murphy, Head of Planning with Homes for Scotland. We are also joined online by Hazel Johnson, Director of the Built Environment Forum Scotland, and our colleague Colette Stevenson, MSP. So a warm welcome to our witnesses for the meeting, and we've got round about 90 minutes for this particular part of the discussion. So we've got a number of questions we hope to put to you and see how far we can get with this really important subject for us. So I'll kick off, if it's okay, with 2 or 3 questions for you. Just to ask you your views, is there any evidence that the NPF4 is actually helping to deliver developments that support the key 6 spatial priorities? You know, principally compact urban growth and rural revitalisation. So could you give us a flavour of what your view of that is, please? Maybe start with Kevin, if that's okay.
Okay. Good morning. Can you hear me okay? Yeah. So NPF4 obviously came out 2 years ago, February 2023. It came out later than initially planned, so there's now a bit of a lag in terms of local development plans being delivered across the country. There's 34 local authorities. Within those, there's only 20 local development plans are now out of date. So that's land allocations that are lagging in terms of land supply. So NPF4 set a context, and all decisions have to be made in accordance with the development plan unless material considerations indicate otherwise. However, the challenge is that a lot of land is based in brownfield land, is in sort of town centres and city centres, and with sort of flooding policies, a lot of that is now sort of purified because SEPA's flooding guidance has changed. A lot of sites are underwater and more challengeable to deliver, and the sector is really being challenged by the policy.
Thank you. Esme?
Yeah, I mean, I think if it's 2 years after it's come in, and I think it is still a bit of wait and see, although that's it's been in for a while, the time it takes for planning applications to go through. But yeah, I think that's correct that we're just starting to see that kind of wave of new local development plans, and certainly there's an expectation that a lot of them will be coming forward through that kind of first gate check process quite soon. So I think once that's in place, we'll see how NPF4 is then translated into those local development plans. But certainly we're seeing decisions coming through the system. I mean, I think the way that all the policies are being balanced is still a sort of ongoing issue, and I think there's still certainly concerns about our members about how that balance is sometimes happening, and whether those kind of key elements that go through NPF4 in terms of addressing the climate and nature crises are being given the weight that they should be in terms of policy 1 and the way that they thread through the whole plan.
Thank you, Esme. I'll just come to that in a wee moment. But Hazel, do you have an initial view on whether NPF4 is actually helping us to deliver developments?
Thank you, Convener. I think we've also seen from members that whilst the primary concern is the practical ability of under-resourced planning authorities to support delivery, is also the clarity and consistency of guidance linked to NPF4 could be addressed in that there are so many supporting documents, but a lack of cohesion and clarity on how these interact, and guidance that's been slow to materialise. So nothing too much to say to the evidence, but sort of I think points on delivery and some conflicting hierarchies which have come out.
Okay, thank you, Hazel. Esme, you were mentioning climate and nature there. I mean, there's a particular focus in NPF4 to tackle climate and nature emergencies, as we know. Could you just share a little view about whether you think there's enough evidence that considerations for those are driving the development proposals that are coming forward, or whether there's still a lack of progress within that space as well?
to say we think there is a lack of progress, and that kind of it picks up on the points about resourcing and lack of guidance as well. So at the last review a year ago, the Scottish Government guidance for biodiversity was in draft, and it's still in draft. And it's really important that that is updated, because decisions are being made with less weight being placed on that guidance because it still is in draft form. So it's really important to give certainty to everyone, to communities and developers, excuse me, that is finalised. And I think that's the guidance that would apply for those kind of major, those national and EIA developments, so really big schemes. So clarity in that guidance is really, really important. And in terms of resourcing, yes, again, it was raised the last time in terms of resourcing for planners themselves, in terms of the number of planners, but crucially as well is it's having that support. So you're having your ecologists and your specialists that are supporting those planners as well. So I think in terms of movement on that, I think we have seen changes in terms of changes in the planning fees. So there was the proposals for the appeal fees and the increase in planning fees, which is great in terms of just helping that resourcing. And I think the work that's been done in terms of future planners and supporting planners is great. And I don't think I can kind of understate the importance and that appreciation of seeing planning as something which can help that climate and nature crisis, which can be a kind of positive driver for it. And we really hope that the Scottish Government continues that approach. But in terms of actual applying of Policy 3 and that requirement for biodiversity enhancement, I mean, we're certainly seeing patchy results. There's inconsistency across the country. And our members are feeling that there's perhaps being a slight move away from it, just a slight sort of shift in rhetoric. Really need that leadership in terms of that guidance to saying this is what significant means. You need to deliver significant enhancement, and this is what the expectations are. So, as I say, I think that's something that would benefit everyone, developers and communities, to know what the expectations are. So, it's that kind of level playing field for what's expected, and we're really seeing stuff delivered on the ground.
Thanks for that, Esme. What do you mean by the shift in rhetoric that you've picked up? Could you just explain for the committee what you mean by that?
Well, I think when NPF 4 came out, it seemed quite clear to us that Policy 3 is clear that all developments need to deliver biodiversity enhancement. But I think by not finalising the biodiversity guidance, it feels like there's not given the prioritisation that it should be. But also we've seen a couple of the chief planners' letters which kind of seem to suggest that it should be delivered kind of where it's relevant, or just not kind of really clearly setting out that is an expectation for all developments. So it's just a bit of a concern about that, and whether that's intentional or not. Obviously there's a lot of other issues that are ongoing in planning, but yeah, just a concern from our members that that kind of probably that optimism. I think when NPF 4 came out, we thought this is going to be a real step change, that this could really make a difference. Is maybe feeling that it's not there so much anymore. And I think one thing that has changed since last year is that the Scottish Biodiversity Strategy has been put in place, and those kind of delivery plan and framework documents as well. And it's really important that planning supports that. Obviously, planning isn't the only thing that is going to deliver all the ambitions of the Scottish Biodiversity Strategy, but it has to play its part. And so it's the targets to halt biodiversity loss by 2030, we're getting really close to that, and developments are in the system now which are going to impact on that. So yeah, it's really important that planning supports those kind of wider goals, and that we just don't kind of sort of slacking off on that commitment.
Okay, thanks, Evie. Esme. Kevin, Hazel, what are your views on this, and particularly on the impact that the lack of guidance is maybe having? Is it slowing down development proposals coming forward? So could you share some views on that, perhaps, Kevin? I'll turn to you first, and then Hazel.
Yeah, certainly, just as Esme said, it adds confusion, and there's not a lack of clarity. So we're obviously 2 years on, as touched upon. Nature Scot haven't yet brought out a consultation on biodiversity net gain, and that's not anticipated to be until next year at this time. There is due to be some interim guidance or position statement coming out in the summer. I've not seen anything yet. Don't know if Esme has. So biodiversity is obviously a key sort of pillar of MPF4, and house builders certainly recognise that. They undertake ecology assessments, put forward proposals and planning applications. But up and down the country, the requirements, as Esme touched upon, are different. So one local authority might require one type of assessment and another a different, and it's then viewed differently. So if there was better clarity at national level, then that would benefit everyone.
Okay, thank you, Kevin. Hazel?
Yes, thank you, and absolutely agree with points made by both. I think we've also noted the existence of unclear hierarchies, tensions and contradictions between key policy areas such as biodiversity and protecting historic assets. And we noted sort of the heavy lifting that MPF4 and planning has to do, and to quote sort of Scotland's rich heritage, culture and outstanding environment are national assets which support economy, identity, health and well-being. The tensions within this and difficult economic realities for all sectors at present exacerbate some of these tensions, making it harder for holistic choices to be made. So by way of example, and elaborating on what's been said, the commitment to improving biodiversity has been highlighted by BEFS members as clashing with the commitment to protect historic environment assets. So, for example, a challenge with substantial repair and maintenance works for historic buildings is the obligation to arrange for ecological surveys of bats during breeding season, for example, in spring. And the time window for specialist skills in this area can bring about delays of a year or more, during which the time the fabric of a building may suffer damage and further deteriorate. So there is a desire to see streamlined processes that can mutually deliver across the piece, so using biodiversity and the planning process with regards to historic and existing buildings. And the weighting is also something that's come up, and which policies within that are given adequate weight. And we've noted that an outcome of some of these delays is that BEFS members with assets in significant disrepair have explored risks and uncertainties and costs involved in obtaining permissions under MPF4 has resulted in not being able to take remedial actions on their properties.
Thanks very much for that, Hazel. Thank you so much. I now turn to my colleague Mark Griffin to ask some questions. Mark?
Thanks, Vera. I just wanted to ask, well, come to Kevin first, if that's okay, to ask what impact the establishment of the minimum all-tenure housing land requirement in MPF4 has had on the identification and availability of land for housing that's really ready to develop on.
So the government, as part of MPF4, produced a minimum all-tenure housing land requirement that put a requirement across each local authority. Local authorities now, through their evidence gathering, are targeting a local housing land requirement. And as touched upon, they're all generally behind or slipping in terms of timetables for producing new local development plans. So local development plans will create a new land supply for the country going forward in each local authority area. And the minimum all-tenure housing land requirement has been recognised by the Centre for Housing Market Analysis as the very minimum requirement. And Homes for Scotland did some research last year that came out at the beginning of 2024, which suggested that the gross figure could be much higher across the country, potentially about 28% of the population in some sort of housing need. In discussions with the Scottish Government and various stakeholders, the need was identified as somewhere in between. But there's no analysis yet. That's what local authorities are undertaking just now. But some local authorities, such as Midlothian, have just proposed Mathler +1 as their housing land requirement, whereas Aberdeenshire have been much more ambitious. And that NPF4 said that councils should be ambitious in terms of what their housing requirement is for their area, because we obviously have a housing emergency. 13 local emergencies declared, so there's a need to to be ambitious in terms of figures, particularly at a time when Scotland, by comparison to England, isn't being quite as ambitious in terms of its proposals for development.
When it comes to local authorities researching their individual Matlar figures, they're doing their housing needs and demand assessments locally. Do you have a view as to how comprehensive those assessments are when it comes to reaching the desired figure that they're then proposing?
Each one is different in terms of their local pressures, and whether it be homelessness or identified needs. So we're trying to work with as many as possible in terms of trying to encourage them and supporting them to have a higher figure to identify both the need and demand for those councils and for the population there that need homes. So there's a lot of work going into that just now.
Okay, thanks. Esme or Hazel, I don't know if anybody else wants to come in and talk about the impact the Matlar figures have had.
I don't have anything particular to add. Claire from Planning Democracy will be appearing at the session on the 17th, so I think she'll have a lot more information about the details of Matlar and can hopefully answer those.
Okay, thanks. Hazel?
Nothing specific to add to Matlar, no, but just to note that we've picked up that the timing challenge with local development plans. I mean, the ability of these to help implement and resource local living requirements and access to amenities in lower density places does continue to be an open question for BEF's members. And whilst some LDPs are in development, we understand that many planning authorities are awaiting guidance and not expecting to adopt new iterations until 2028-2030. The current 2023 to 28 period in which most administrative regions are operating, they're under a new MPF and an old LDP. So that can create further confusion and around land and building reuse plans and priorities.
Thank you. Second question, Convener, is more generally on housing delivery. Go back to you again, Kevin, just to ask whether you think it's going to be possible to deliver more housing under NPF4 than it would have previously been possible under the previous regime.
I think at the moment, as touched upon earlier, it's a decision to be made in accordance with the development plan unless material considerations state otherwise. So, as Esme touched upon, there's a bit of confusion as to policy hierarchy. So the Chief Planner produced a letter last year that said all policies were equal. However, there still appears to be a bit more of a balance towards climate change and biodiversity. The I suppose release clause within Policy 16 on housing was tested through the Moss End decision last year, and it's reduced the opportunity for sites to be brought forward that aren't allocated in a local development plan. With 20 local development plans out of date, the land supply that was allocated in those is being eaten up and developed. There's very few new or easy sites left. It's those with contamination or other challenging issues that are left. And obviously it's touched upon just now by Hazel. You know, some local development plans might not be replaced until 2030. Angus being one, it's dated from 2016. So those areas are going to suffer in terms of land supply. As 5 local development plans are already over 5 years old, and 11 of local development plans that are due to be, well, sorry, there's 5 targeted after 2028 for when they're supposed to have new local development plans, and 11 are the 3-month period before that. But with recent slippage, I suspect they may well slip beyond that, and there's no incentive or penalty for not reaching the May 2028 target for a new LDP.
So, given the slippage in local development plans coming forward, then do you think it's important, or would you be calling for the reintroduction of that 16F in favour of sustainable development?
We've suggested to the Scottish Government they do consider some sort of policy intervention. We have, as touched upon, a housing emergency, so there's a need for some sort of release clause, even if temporary. So the presumption in favour of sustainable development is something we've suggested could be released, brought back into play, but perhaps until the new LDP was published, or the new or a housing emergency was addressed within that council area. So and there could be criteria for it as well. Perhaps greater weight or support if the Matlar figures weren't being reached on that annual basis. It would be an incentive for councils as well to produce their local development plan sooner, so they could remove that policy requirement.
Okay, thanks. Esme?
We certainly don't think there is a need to go back to that system of kind of that uncertainty that was given to allowing unallocated sites. I mean, there still is provision in NPF 4 for that, but the presumption is that it should just be for allocated sites. And I think that's really important, especially for communities. They engage in a local development plan process, and that's a long and complicated process. And for people to have faith in that and to sort of believe in that process of that plan-led system that we have, it's really important that the way that policy 16 is working continues to work. And I think in that decision at Moss End is an important one and supports that. And certainly there are challenges, but the housing emergency is more than just about building on sort of easily developable land. So obviously the policy in NPF 4 to do with development of brownfield and vacant and derelict land is quite supportive of that. And there's over, I think the Scottish Government statistics are over 9,000 hectares of vacant and derelict land in Scotland. So if there's ways of incentivising the development of that land more, it's also to do with the affordability of housing as well, and not just the kind of building of units. So it is a really complex problem, but yeah, the importance of having that plan-led system is something that is really crucial. And I think in terms of a sort of hierarchy or weighing policies against each other, I think any planning system, whether it's a local development plan or sorry, any planning decision, whether it's based on a local development plan or NPF 4, it's always about balancing different policies. And yes, certainly the NPF 4 is to be read as a whole. But policy 1, the first policy in NPF 4, says when considering all development proposals, significant weight will be given to the global climate and nature crisis. So arguably there is a hierarchy, and that's that everything, well, I'm not sure if hierarchy is the right word, but the point is that significant weight is to be given to all, to those issues and all decisions. And I think that's important.
Thank you. Hazel, did you want to come in?
There's a more general point, not so much about allocation of land, more the role that existing building stock has to play through continued use, reuse and maintenance and a fabric first approach to addressing the housing emergency. The assets cannot be understated as a resource, and appropriate adaptations of empty and vacant buildings are an important part of this. We've previously noted that housing or existing buildings rather, and existing housing it has been recognised as part of existing infrastructure, and so that the account of the role that existing buildings have to play in the housing emergency is noted.
Thank you. Thanks, Commissioner.
Thanks very much. Thank you, Mark. Could I invite Megan Gallagher to put some questions now, please?
And if I may pick up on the sort of exchange between yourself, Esme, and my colleague Mark Griffin. So I thought it was really interesting when you said point 1 of NPF 4 is about the nature and biodiversity crisis, and I don't think anyone is going to argue against that. But that, of course, was created before we had the housing emergency declared as well. And, you know, as you say, you know, hierarchy not being the right word to use there, because what we're talking about is, of course, managing our nature, biodiversity, but also trying to make sure that people have safe, secure and affordable homes. So I think we do need to look at those within that context. I think that's really important in relation to how we look at NPF 4. But my first question relates to the adoption of NPF 4, because we've had a lot of associated advice, we've had guidance, some implemented, some not, we've had working groups, and I'm wondering what impact that has had on the ability of communities to meaningfully engage with the planning system. So if I could start with yourself, Esme, just because I was picking up on the point that you made. Is it helping or hindering with the local place plan development itself?
I certainly don't think that NPF 4 in itself is hindering it, but I think NPF 4 is a document that it needs support from wider wider things. So I think the difficulties for communities engaging are huge, and some communities are seeing really big, complex developments that are affecting them. There's developments that are coming back again and again that people are having to engage in and get their heads round. You know, there's a huge amount of documentation, and the people have really valuable knowledge about their area, and I think want to engage, but it is really difficult. I think the local place plans, how they fit into local development plans and how they'll fit into decision making isn't entirely clear. And so I think certainly if the amount of resources that go into them, if you're then not seeing that kind of result in a sort of positive change for communities, then I think people will find that really difficult. So I think there's a continual sort of seemingly never-ending kind of request for consultation on individual applications, but on legislation and on policy and everything. So I think the pressures are huge on communities, but then we also see a massive willingness for communities to kind of share that knowledge and that expertise they have about their areas. So it's certainly something that we don't want to see any move away from that engagement with communities, but it's just a recognition that it is, you know, it's a lot to ask for people over a long period, and I think it's important that people, they'll be willing to get engaged if they have faith in the system and if they, you know, see that system working for them.
And I think there's an element of, you know, communities understanding what MPF4 is. That's been something that we've discussed a lot, you know, actually engaging with communities directly so they know that they can advocate, but also at the same time they know their areas, as you rightfully say. But I think there's still a lack of understanding in relation to MPF4, what that means and how people can actually get involved in that process as well. Kevin, if I could ask from a sort of developer point of view as well, because we've got communities, but of course developers as well, you know, in relation to the local place plans themselves, do you think that the advice, the guidance is creating a confused landscape?
It is a little, yes. So, I mean, most people's initial interaction with the planning system is when somebody submits a planning application, whether it be a neighbour's extension or a housing development in the local area. A lot of people probably don't understand or know what MPF4 is and how it fits into the bigger development plan, and equally what the local allocations are in their area. So, local place plans will be a challenge for lots of communities to prepare. There's not any kind of national database that shows what people are planning to do, and then equally what they're doing, so that other people can learn from that. And not all local authorities have made funding available, and so it's only some certain communities that can perhaps afford to prepare one in the first place. But if there was some sort of database and opportunity for developers to engage with the public in these communities, there may be an opportunity to work together to identify and take forward housing proposals in the area, but also help fund perhaps the wider work that has been done to actually prepare the plan in the first place, given how it will fit into local development plans going forward.
Thank you very much for that. And Hazel, I suppose in the round, if you want to touch upon the local place plans.
And agree with points that have been made. There's further work to be done in better engaging communities through access to information and guidance for MPF4, local development plans, local place plans, and the policies do clearly recognise the role of communities in shaping their places. I would agree that a more accessible digital platform would enhance practical implementation. There's been some suggestions around an easy-to-use interactive living resource, perhaps, which could potentially provide significant improvements in access and understanding for all players across the piece, from citizens, community groups, to asset owners, developments and planning professionals as well. Just to note as well, the relationships between MPF4 and we're talking about the sort of the complex landscape, building standards, local place plans, place principle, and forthcoming heat and buildings bill is unclear to a broad range of players in the built environment sector. And this is back to the question of hierarchy and sort of a complex policy landscape, which can be difficult to navigate for communities and decision makers alike.
Thank you very much. If I may move on to the interpretation of MPF4, specifically the ongoing, the never-ending debate of 20-minute neighbourhoods and the impact that these can have on remote rural developments, stifling potential development in those areas. So if I could ask the panel, are 20-minute neighbourhoods achievable? Why is development being stifling, and how might it be overcome? And Kevin, if I could start with you on this one, please.
So I think it's horses for courses. If you look across the country, if you take, let's say, somewhere like Pitlochry, it might have facilities to serve the local community within the town. But if you get into more rural areas, it's more about local living, because people are perhaps more used to travelling, whether it be the doctors or the dentist or the school. So in all scenarios, 20-minute neighbourhoods won't be possible. Housing has a role to play in terms of integrating with existing settlements. So in some cases it might be supporting existing services, because generally speaking, the housing occupancy is getting less. It's about 2.14 per household. But in urban areas, there might be areas where there's gaps in what could be a 20-minute neighbourhood that housing could potentially provide, whether that be, if it's large enough, the development, a retail unit or travel hub or similar. So there is opportunities for housing to help support and deliver that. But just going back to the local development plan, we can't always address all policies. So there are scenarios where you may have to sort of accept that to encourage development and address other concerns, some things you may have to put to the side or with want for a better term, settle for what you've been offered or got or agreed on.
Thank you very much for that. Hazel or Esme, any comments on 20-minute neighbourhoods?
I think just to reiterate that, I think that's right. It's about looking at things in the round and making decisions based on the actual place. And we'll maybe see more when local development plans come out and how that's translated locally.
Yeah, thank you. I think I'd agree. A sort of a flexible, holistic approach is also supported, and we've had some members reporting concerns that sort of an overcautious and risk-averse an unduly rigid approach to interpretation and application of policy has emerged, which has led to situations where some development and refurbishment plans could be refused, or whilst a more flexible approach might have led to finding more mutually agreeable solutions that align with MPF4 principles, and in some cases could better enable the use and reuse of empty and vacant historic buildings and homes with a view to maximising and leveraging the assets within communities. So again, in relation to 20-minute neighbourhoods as well.
No, thank you very much for that. And then finally, on my last question, I was intrigued to learn that Homes for Scotland has asked for a minimum target to be established of 25,000 new homes to be built each year. So Kevin, if I could come back to yourself, could you expand a little bit more on that minimum target, what that would mean in the context of the housing emergency that we've been speaking about this morning, but also on the practical side of things, how could that be achieved?
Certainly. So obviously pre-recession, we were up around 25,000 and exceeding that some years in terms of delivery. And at the time, Scottish Government were talking about a 35,000 target per annum. But taking the 25,000 target since the recession, we've gradually built back up. Unfortunately, COVID hit and numbers fell again. So there's been a shortfall, if you like, because we haven't achieved the 25,000. So there's well over 100,000 homes that haven't been delivered. And the thing that will have the biggest impact on actually addressing the housing emergency is more homes. Yes, we can fill voids, and that's the right thing to do, and so on. But new homes is what we need, whether they be 1 bed, 2 bed, 5 bed, depending on local need and circumstances. So that's what we're advocating. It shows the ambition. As touched upon, the English system they've kind of taken the handbrake off down south. They've set an ambitious target. Whether they can achieve that or not is another matter. But in Scotland, we showed during COVID, where the building sites were shut for 6 months, that we could deliver numbers. We still achieved, I think it was about sort of 16,000 sort of completions that year. So despite being, as I said, shut for 6 months. So there is a need, though, to start training up the next generation of apprentices and so on. But that's a challenge for the house builders. If there's the demand there, they can make things happen.
No, thank you very much, all. Convener, thank you.
Thank you, Megan. We've got a supplementary on those issues from Emma Roddick. Emma?
Convener, yeah, I want to pick up there on Kevin and Hazel's responses in particular on 20-minute neighbourhoods. Thinking about how they can be applied in rural areas, surely the policy is there not just to build homes within a 20-minute radius of where things already exist, but to get people thinking about what services and facilities are not in an area and how to use planning to facilitate that. So do we just need to encourage local authorities to think differently about what it means when they come up against, okay, here's a good place for housing, there's need for housing, there's people waiting for housing in this rural area, but we don't have anything within 20 minutes and therefore we can't build, and instead going, right, how do we make sure that there are work opportunities, leisure facilities within 20 minutes?
I'll go first if I may. I think a lot of it comes down to sort of critical mass of people, and so if there isn't enough people in the area, they may not be able to support the services, so whether that be the corner shop or a school. So there will be a need, I think, for a certain number of homes in some rural communities to, as I said earlier, just sustain some of the local services, whether that be the school or the shop. But there could be sort of more homes, but it's then where are the jobs potentially for those people? Yes, more people working from home, but there's often a need still to go into the office, and so you're then thinking about, well, they're having to drive probably, or because there might not be the train links or the bus links from those communities. So it is about the critical mass to actually support some of those services, which is why people will still need to travel and
Hazel, do you have any reflections?
Not a huge amount more to add. I think that the point about it sort of being a holistic issue and not just about building specifically is well made. Meaningful investment and in 20-minute neighbourhoods would require a culture shift, looking at what's there already, what the community looks like. So obviously specific to individual communities and areas, but then also what skills and employment opportunities exist in those areas. And one of the policy areas that BEFS has been very active in is looking at skills around construction, not purely around traditional skills, but in terms of again, I've used the phrase leveraging existing building stock assets, and that's one way of creating employment through the repair and maintenance agenda as well. But it's very much a specific to each individual location issue, we would say.
Thank you, Emma. Could I now invite our colleague Alexander Stewart to pose a few questions? The local development plans were raised earlier on, I know, but I'm sure Alexander will be keen to develop that discussion.
Proposed, there was an enthusiastic and a feeling that this was the right way forward, and people were quite involved and wanted to be quite elated by the whole process. But as we have progressed, concerns have been raised about the slow progress of producing many of the local development plans, and that's included when we've taken evidence of reports that many are rejected when it gets to the gate check. And the gate check was put there as an attempt to manage that. So how can we develop and how can we ensure that the adoption of these new plans are accelerated if there seems to be a problem from the enthusiasm to put it together? It gets as far as the gate check and there seems to be some issues, and then it doesn't necessarily progress. And that then gives rejections and think, well, what was the point and where are we going from here and how do you progress that? So it's all about trying to ensure that there's a better acceleration of the process. Kevin, maybe you want to...
Yeah, as you touched upon, obviously, probably around half of the evidence reports that have gone up through to the gate check have been returned as insufficient. Some of those are a case of they haven't managed to unfortunately address or set out what the evidence is and then justify that evidence sufficiently. There is sort of various groups such as Head to Planning Scotland and through the local government as well, or the Scottish Government as well, sort of meeting to discuss and learn from some of those gate checks. so that they can hopefully accelerate, and future councils going up to the gate check can get them through first time, because they don't want it returned, because you're losing sort of potentially 6 months. I think Fife has lost the best part of a year. They were first up, so they I suppose had a challenge being the guinea pig. But I think it's very much about collaboration. So we've certainly been working hard with as many local authorities as possible to talk and to have open discussions about local housing land requirements and housing requirements, because housing, when you look at all national planning framework policies, affects just about 60-70% of them. So we're trying to give us constructive criticism and feedback, that critical friend role, to as many local authorities as possible, to try and help them get through the process first time, because it's in our interest that they get through as well.
And, that brings a problem that there was maybe a misinterpretation of what was planned or what was expected in the execution of putting the plan together. And how do you then support and give that training? And I know you've mentioned that there are views and things that might well happen in the future, but it's important to give them that confidence to start with, because when something is rejected, it will then obviously they haven't achieved their goal, they haven't achieved their ambition and the timescale. So it knocks them back, and as you said, Fife may well have been the guinea pig in that process, but it might not have been a overall exciting experience for them when it didn't work for them, and others have found the same. I think that there needs to be some support to give them the aspiration to achieve, because they want to get that plan together. They need that plan, but as I say, if the timescales are not there, then that sours the whole process. Yeah, I agree. It does, and there's the planning hub is something that's been brought forward by the Scottish Government. We have an understanding that they've written out to the various local authorities to say, what do you need help with? So that is an opportunity potentially for the planning hub to help and to support the local development plans coming forward. Okay, Esme, anything you want to add?
Yeah, I mean, I think certainly it's a whole new process. It's a whole, the first time that local authorities or planning authorities are producing these plans. And so, yeah, I think, it's obviously perhaps inevitable that there would be some challenges, especially at the beginning. And I understand that there could be quite a quick turnaround. I think Glasgow was one that had it sent back and then has been resubmitted. So I think, certainly learning from the other cases and, working with other stakeholders will hopefully be helpful. And certainly any support that the Scottish Government can give, or the Improvement Service can support planning authorities would certainly be useful in trying to kind of meet those targets. But hopefully that it will become less of a painful process as it goes along.
Hazel, anything to add?
Yes, thank you. Also agree with the waiting to see how these does play out, but would probably want to note as well that planning authorities have been obliged to deal with a bit of a triple threat in the current context: significant decline in resource and a rise in additional duties and reporting obligations, and as we've already mentioned, the complex policy landscape to navigate. And we've noted that a linked problem is the reality that many experienced planners have left the sector in the last 10 years. This is also noting the investment in planning and the work of the Improvement Service. But in general, the system's relying on smaller planning teams, in some case with less experienced staff. And these posts are not necessarily being backfilled, which has exacerbated delays, and that's not insignificant also in relation to LDPs.
And the whole idea about resourcing, you've all touched on that this morning, about the size of some of the planning authorities and the recruitment and retention. So resourcing of planning departments has been a major concern, and we've heard that from nearly everyone who's given us written views and evidence already. So what can be done to tackle the issue? And are there any views from any of you about the potential of ring fencing? I know that's been talked about, it's been mooted, that ring fencing of planning fee income could be something that may support or assist or strengthen some of that. So it would be good to get a flavour of where you are, because there is a problem when it comes to resourcing, and that is about maintaining and retaining and ensuring that you have the calibre of staff that are able to do what's expected of them in the timescale. And as I say, everyone who's given us views has expressed the concern about that. So it is obviously a major problem for the sector and the industry. Kevin?
It is a challenge up and down the country. So we deal with the majority of the mainland authorities. So taking Inverclyde and Western Bartonshire, they have planning policy teams of one each. And although Western Bartonshire just recruited, so they by comparison are sort of already on the back foot when you consider them to maybe a larger authority like Edinburgh or Glasgow with the resources they have for preparing a local development plan. I think there's a potential opportunity for digital technology to start being interventionist, whether it be validation processes or use of AI, that sort of thing, to try and free up planners' time. Potentially, sort of, I suppose, redirecting some of the resource within local authorities to support the policy teams. I know some local authorities have drafted in people from the housing departments or the housing sections. So those are ways of potentially helping support the policy teams at this challenging time. But ring fencing of planning fees is something that we've been advocating. So the Verta House Agreement allows it where in certain circumstances, and I think this is one where it should be. Heads of Planning Scotland did research back in 2019, the last time the planning fees were increased. And only a third of the planning fee increases actually went back into the planning service. You touched upon resources where the planning numbers are the lowest they are for the last 5 years. And I think in terms of budgets, they're down 28% on 2010. So it's just getting, the belt's getting tightened and tightened. And the money that has been raised in 2019 from the HOPS research went into other departments, whether it be education and so on. So I think, given the challenge we face in planning, I think there is a need for ring-fencing planning fees to help support delivery of a service, because there's no other way we'll be able to deliver housing emergency and all the potential, or address housing emergency and all the other benefits planning can provide as well.
And as you identify, if planning takes longer to achieve, the applicant has to then progress that. It can be more costly than the time duration it takes for an application to progress. Now takes much longer than it did in the past. And if there's only a handful of people or a minimum number of people in that department, then it's virtually impossible, depending on the amount of applications that they're having to deal with in a regular timescale. So thank you. Esme, anything from your side?
Yeah, certainly the resourcing is an issue, and even if the kind of fees were to provide cost recovery for planning applications, then obviously that doesn't cover the policy side of it. So yeah, I think there's a wider issue of how planning departments are supported, and I think absolutely it's such a critical role. And I think if yeah, absolutely right, that if it's not resourced properly, it can lead to those delays, but also the quality of outcomes. So to have the time to have discussions with stakeholders, to have discussions with the applicants, whether that's pre-application or during the application, to have those kind of quality discussions and kind of resolving issues, you know, are likely to be less possible if you don't have those resources and you're really up against it. So definitely I think resourcing is important, of getting the applications through, but also the quality of the outcomes as well. So certainly in terms of making use of digital resources where possible, and keeping on with the programme of kind of sharing best practice and sharing expertise where possible as well. And I think if there's a role for developers in this in some ways in terms of the data that's available. So for instance, there's a massive amount of information that's collected by developers in terms of their EIAs and the work that they do on that, and certainly in terms of energy consents, it's a huge amount of data, and assessing the kind of cumulative impacts, and that can be really difficult. So there was a commitment in the onshore wind sector deal to have a sort of data centre, a data repository, to have that information that could be made available and help decisions. So we would certainly encourage things like that to be taken forward, where you know, to sort of prevent reinventing the wheel, to kind of sharing that knowledge and that information. So yeah, anything that can make those decisions more quickly and make better decisions would be great.
Thank you. Hazel, anything to add?
Yeah, thank you. I very much agree with sort of the access to knowledge and shared skills and resources. And at present, we're noticing that many local authorities are unable to fund career development training and don't employ qualified planners at all levels of the service. So investment in this area could see relevant bodies providing learning for staff that would improve the confidence and ability and decision making. I think it's probably also worth saying that the resourcing and planning can't be separated from a reduction in training available through tertiary education. There's an increasing level of specialisms needed in order to reduce the requirement for handing inquiries over to consultants, which then also creates delays, as with regards to it's the specialist knowledge in the right areas at the right time. And in relation to skills gaps and accessing the relevant specialist knowledge, we've noted that there isn't necessarily a conservation specialist and planning teams, and that's compounded by similar reduction of personnel skill sets and experience in related areas such as transport, archaeology, architecture, and ecology, which again we talked about delays, but all of this does exacerbate that and limits the scope for enhancement across themes and local government departments, which is where you'd want to see that holistic approach.
Okay. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you, Alexander. Could I invite Emma Roddick to put some questions now, please, Emma?
I wanted to ask yourself, Esme, about the concerns that have been raised on an over-reliance on planning conditions to deliver biodiversity goals. I know that you've argued that conditions are often not complied with and enforcement seems to be relatively rare, and planning democracy is also agreed with this in evidence to the committee. So are conditions often flouted?
Well, certainly the research that's been done by Planning Democracy and I think the evidence that's presented by Dr. Kira Chapman and Professor Malcolm Tate in terms of research that they've done in England has found that a lot of the commitments are made at the time of a decision are not actually followed through, and the research found that in a lot of cases the commitments to sort of landscaping, tree planting, things like that, hadn't been complied with. And that's certainly the work that Planning Democracy have done as well, has found in a lot of cases they're just not followed through. And I think that in terms of conditions being applied, they can be effective. Again, part of that comes back to resourcing. Whatever level the decision is made at, the enforcement of conditions comes back to a local authority to enforce. And it can be very difficult when the local authority is under pressure to resource that properly. I think there's also the potential for a lot to be put on conditions. So I think to be effective, they have to be carefully worded, but there has to be enough information at the time of the decision to make sure that there's enough certainty that whatever is being promised in those conditions can actually be delivered. So certainly there would be concern that that there would be a move to putting information, kind of pushing the information back to a later stage, and so it's absolutely appropriate in a lot of cases to say, well, the actual detail of perhaps a habitat management plan or the exact species of tree that you're going to plant on a development is left to a later stage. But there needs to be enough information of where that is going to go. Is there realistic certainty that could actually be developed? Might there be issues with control over land that might make that difficult? So certainly the research that's been done unfortunately doesn't show that they're a kind of certain way of delivering what is being taken into account at the decision. And that's really important, because quite often it is that mitigation. It's saying, well, okay, it will have an impact, but we're going to do this to mitigate those impacts and to make the development acceptable and to make it as proposed. So if those things are not then happening, that's a really big issue, and it's a really big issue for communities as well, who are then obviously you know, they quite often see the impact of that when the developments come along. So I think it's not that, you know, there's an appropriate use for conditions, and we would hope that responsible developers would, you know, would comply with them. But unfortunately, the evidence we've seen is that in a lot of cases that isn't happening. So yeah, I think it's making sure that it's effective at the time of decision, but also having that enforcement and monitoring. Because the work that's been done is by Planning Democracy and by universities. As far as we know, there hasn't been that kind of monitoring from a sort of Scottish Government point of view of that level of seeing how effective it is. And I think we need to think really carefully about that, because if conditions aren't working, well, we need to address that and think about what the alternatives are, or what are the reasons for that, instead of kind of continuing on in the same way if they're not being effective.
Yeah, you said monitoring a few times there, and that kind of takes me on to my next question. Do you think that a lot of enforcement isn't happening because there's just not that automatic kind of scrutiny point for officers and local councillors to say, right, has this actually been carried out? Have those conditions that we agreed this application on the basis of actually come to fruition?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really difficult in terms of resourcing. It's difficult, but also I think quite often it will rely on maybe a complaint, or it will rely on the community to kind of highlight issues. I think there has been some use of another condition, but requiring a planning monitoring officer. So maybe some assistance in terms of monitoring the conditions, which could help resourcing for local authorities as well. But I think in terms of the pressures of kind of getting applications in, there is perhaps cases where, okay, a decision has been made, kind of onto the next decision, onto the next application, and there's not the same kind of you know, there's not a kind of set time scale or anything for enforcement. It will depend when the development comes through, or various different stages for enforcement to take place. So it is complex, and quite often what enforcement officers or planning officers are being asked to discharge in terms of the conditions can be quite complex in themselves. So if, especially if everything is kind of pushed back onto the condition, you know, they might be being asked to consider a whole habitat management plan at the post-consent condition stage, and then that would then require potentially involvement of other specialists as well. And similarly, for enforcement officers to actually go out on site and be able to see whether someone has complied with a condition could sometimes be quite complex, and certainly time-consuming. And also depending on local authorities. I mean, some sites are not, you know, not easy to get to. They could require quite a lot of time, even to get to the site itself, never mind the details of the conditions. So it is a huge area, and I think it's yeah, definitely that importance of thinking really carefully about at the decision stage the impact of having to monitor and enforce those conditions.
So when there is a complaint or some other trigger that, you know, encourages officers to say, right, it's maybe time to look at enforcement here, do you think that local authorities have enough tools at their disposal to actually then force conditions to be complied with?
I certainly think there are things that can be done. I think probably Hawks would be a better place to speak about if they need more tools in terms of enforcement. But certainly the research that has been done, as far as I know, it hasn't identified as that particular issue. It is more about the resourcing and about the wording of the conditions and the precision of the conditions, and how much they're actually realistic. So yeah, I think it's, from what we've seen, is that it's more about the resourcing issue and being able to actually kind of address the complexity of those issues. But it should be, you know, there are things that enforcement can do, but I think the wording of the conditions as much as anything else is just really important at the time of decision making.
Thank you. Can I ask if anybody else has comments or reflections on how to increase compliance, or whether there needs to be a clearer point of action for checking in on whether conditions are being met?
If you're happy, Hazel. So each local authority has a different approach to how they monitor and manage conditions. A lot will produce a matrix, so it sets out your pre-start conditions, then your conditions during the actual process of the planning application. There is an issue in some respects, though, that there's no monitoring or sort of publication of performance figures and for condition sign-off. So quite often that can take a bit of time, because the case officer, particularly under resource planning services, is dealing with planning applications ranging from sort of satellite dishes and replacement windows in conservation areas to a couple of hundred houses and whatever. So there is challenges in terms of developers. Most of them don't want the bad PR from ultimately building their houses and being in breach of planning conditions. The local authorities do have powers in terms of stop notice or similar to actually take action should they need to, but hopefully it doesn't get to that stage. It is, and there is an element though of local policing being required by the local community, but sometimes their aspirations are very different to what is possible on the site, or indeed reasonable in terms of meeting the policy criteria.
Thank you. I'll also come in, if I may. Just a general point around public image and public responsibility as well. And I think in terms of the information that's provided at point of application, and again, this is back to capacity and resource, and the quality of planning applications received can be variable. And we've heard, we know that considerable time can be spent assessing an application and then requesting information at validation stage and beyond. And this could be assisted by investment in guidance and information for applicants, and it's reasonable for applicants to look for guidance that's available, why they've included it, and as much detail as possible to avoid conditions being imposed which generate additional and then duplication of work at a future stage. And again, back to sort of the accessibility and quality of guidance.
Okay. Thank you very much. Emma, could I call on our colleague Colette Stevenson, MSP, who joins us online to put some questions? Colette? Can't hear you yet. Hold on. Till we get your voice.
Oh.
Okay.
Hi, thank you very much. Good morning to all of you. So the Royal Incorporation of Architects in Scotland has called for a significant rollout of the master plan consent areas across Scotland. So really at the heart of it is to reduce the administrative burden on planning authorities and speed up decision making. Can I just ask each of you, do you support this? And if you do, can you sort of elaborate as to why? I'll bring in Hazel first of all on that one, if you've got any comments.
Brief comments. Interconnected nature and the dependencies around master plan consent areas. There's been questions around wider resourcing of the proposals, and I think there's questions that we would say are yet to be answered around the efficacy of those.
Okay. Thanks, Hazel. I'm going to ask if the rest of our panel have got any comments on that.
Yeah, I think my understanding is that master plan consent areas still require quite a lot of kind of upfront resourcing and upfront input from local authorities. So whether that's going to be an issue and whether they'll want to take that forward. But certainly we would have any concerns if there was a move to kind of reduce the scrutiny at the planning stage. So I think there's a bit of lack of clarity perhaps just now, or a concern that master plan consents area might be a way of kind of reducing the scrutiny and how communities and other stakeholders would be involved in the development. proposals at that stage, if it would be difficult to become engaged at that stage before actual applications were on the ground. So yeah, need to ensure that there's still that kind of scrutiny and high quality of development.
We support the principle of master. Yeah, we support the principle of master plan consent areas. There is scope for potential EIA requirements if required, and there is a requirement for engagement with the local community, but it's led by the council. And obviously National Planning Framework 4 brought in 49 new actions for local authorities at a time when they're under-resourced. So the councils we've spoken to have said that they aren't interested generally in taking forward master plan consent areas. I'm only aware of 3 that are actually looking seriously at taking forward them for residential purposes. One is Highland, obviously, to address the pressures up there for Green Freeport. So I don't think many councils will actually take master plan consent areas forward when they've reduced physical resource in terms of planners, but also money, because they have to fund reports, etc. up front. Although there's, I believe, a seed fund for Scottish Government to help support that, I think they just don't have the time or resource, and it may well take 2 or 3 years to actually see houses or other development popping out the ground.
Okay, thanks. So just in terms of this committee itself, I mean, how best can they focus on MPF4 scrutiny to ensure it targets particular areas of concern to the communities and stakeholders? And sort of to contextualise that, as a previous member on the planning committee as a councillor, one of the big things that used to always come out was Section 75 developer contributions. And I'm going to touch upon the sort of community growth area in East Kilbride. It's probably one of the biggest community growth areas in the whole of sort of central Scotland. There was a lot of good work come out from that in terms of a new primary school and enhanced work done on one of the other primary schools as well. But how can we look at that more closely? And it's always been a bit of a conundrum within the local authorities about Section 75 money and the scrutiny behind that. So I don't know if Kevin or Esme want to come in, or anyone, or Hazel for that matter.
Section 75, as you touched upon, can be very controversial. So the test for planning conditions and Section 75s are all now written into MPF4 in Policy 18. In terms of the size of development, East Kilbride, as touched upon, it's a huge community growth area, so it can support a number of new services, in this case a primary school. When schools or any other contribution, like transport contribution, is sought, the council obviously look to sort of get a price for that. In some instances, the developer will deliver that directly, potentially through a planning condition or under Section 75 itself, or they may make a contribution, and generally that's split equally between all those that will benefit. In some cases, the council take a share of that because they have existing pupils, let's say, for a school, and otherwise there's a pupil product calculated for the number of houses built, and then the developers, depending on how many houses they built, will pay a certain contribution towards that. So there's different approaches across the country. Some councils, North Ayrshire, don't have a policy on Section 75s. They will negotiate on a case-by-case basis if an intervention is appropriate, whereas others, where there's more pressure perhaps on services, do have policies. And there is often a bit of debate, shall we say, about the scale of the contribution, or what exactly is required in terms of, is it an extension to a school or could it be reconfigured? So there's no quick fix, but it's something that Scottish Government, along with stakeholders, and we are one of them, and councils, etc., are looking at just now in terms of Circular 3/2012 to look at the process. And I believe HOPs are also looking at a Section 75 template that hopefully can have standard clauses in it, because it can often take 3 to 6 months minimum to agree a Section 75 agreement after an application's been to committee. So hopefully we can streamline that aspect of the proposal and we can get decisions made quicker and ultimately on the ground.
I don't have anything else to add.
All right.
Okay, Thank you. I've got no further questions. Thank you. I'll pass you back to the convener.
Thanks very much, Colette. Thank you for that. I have another question from colleague Emma Roddick to put. Emma.
Thank you, convener. I'm aware that the RTPI has asked that the MPF4 be made a dynamic document, which would reflect and reference new advice and guidance whenever it's published. Do witnesses support that suggestion and have any suggestions as to how it could work in practice, particularly given amendments to MPF4 are subject to parliamentary scrutiny and procedure?
I think, yeah, there's needs to be that kind of process for any amendments to MPF4, but I think there is a big role for guidance to play as well in the meantime. So I think as everyone that was involved in MPF4's creation will know that it is a kind of big process, and it's a lot of time and resource in terms of creating that document in the first place. So I certainly think that I suppose if guidance could be used to clarify matters, then there could be a bit of consultation fatigue, I suppose, if there was lots of amendments to MPF4, but there is a process in place for doing that. And I think the key thing is that there is that opportunity for public consultation and public input into that process if it does happen. But certainly I think there's a lot that guidance could do potentially in the meantime. But I suppose it's balancing that with not kind of changing the intention of NPF4, but clarifying it.
I'll come in if I may. BEFS would absolutely support any measures that were proposed with which engagement in the planning system were made easier and more accessible, recognising, of course, the obligations around any amendments. And I think, as was previously mooted, something that was easy to use, interactive and updated regularly, so a living resource could be one of the ways to do this, with recognition, of course, that we're not seeking to place undue burdens on already stretched resources within local authorities. So where this sits would be something that would be interested to explore. But really what I think we see is the engagement within the planning system often comes at point of conflict or at point of it's reactive rather than proactive, and so any measures to fully integrate communities into decision making around their local area would be welcome.
I think that generally there needs to be recognition across all policy of how they all interact, so there's no unintended consequences by policies, whether it be in housing or environment, but to make sure they align and adapt to change.
Okay, thanks very much for that. We're a little bit ahead of time, colleagues, so I would just maybe finally like to invite members of the committee to raise any particular issues that have come out of the discussion, and indeed colleagues on the panel to make a contribution to us that perhaps we haven't covered. And I wonder if I could start with one, if I may. Kevin, you were talking just a moment ago there about unintended consequences, and at the start of your contribution you were talking about the new flood risk assessments. Are you picking up any evidence that these are having an impact not only in development proposals that may come forward, but housing developments that are actually on the ground? I have one or two examples in my constituency where local people have said that the houses they live in at the moment are now subject to increased flood risk assessment, and that is giving them great cause for concern. So could that be described as an unintended consequence of the bill, and have you come across that anywhere else in Scotland?
Yes, it's a short answer. Yeah, so up and down the country, SEPA changed their flood guidance last year. So I'm aware of an area in Perth where a site that had a planning permission in principle, houses have been built and for one part of the site, and they've come in for approval of matters specified in condition for the other to be told it's underwater, essentially. And that is an issue up and down the country. Climate Exchange undertook some work that published earlier this year, and they've suggested we have a more pragmatic approach to flood risk, because they say there's a degree of certainty over the next 40 years as to what the flood risk could be with a 2% temperature rise. But after that, we're not sure. Whereas SEPA are basing it on 75 years from now, in year 2100. And they take a much firmer line in terms of risk. So as you say, they've produced flood maps, and a lot of houses are now underwater that weren't previously. And this is a particular issue in towns and cities, and indeed villages across the country, where previously developable or allocated housing sites are now potentially underwater and challenging to develop, and SEPA are objecting to those. And I think it's particularly challenging for SME developers, because we've lost about 2/3 of SMEs since 2008, and they predominantly build on brownfield sites, which tend to be, in towns and villages with watercourses going through them, to be formed around watercourses. And it's going to be more and more challenging as we go forward, unless it's a relaxation, because the National Flood Resilience Strategy came out as well, and it's talking about essentially retreating from where there's flood risk. So you might have, like, if you take Dumbartonshire, or Dumbarton rather, as an example, they essentially want all development to move up the hill, away from the River Leithen, which isn't practical, because it would blight the town centre, both residential, commercial, etc. So unless there's a more pragmatic approach taken, we could harm a number of communities indefinitely.
I think it's an issue we'll be coming back to, but any comments on that point, Esme or Hazel?
No. I don't think there's anything really to add, apart from, it just kind of emphasises the challenges that we're facing in terms of climate change. But
Okay. Any other comments from members? Megan?
Thank you. It's just an issue that has been raised with me with a local community council. It goes back to the point that I made about the local place plans. Because the community councils themselves are becoming hugely frustrated with the lack of progress in terms of getting the local place plans approved. And we've mentioned a lot in terms of the delay in the timescales, in terms of what could happen and how long it could take to get local place plans in place, local development plans ready and approved. So I'm just wondering, how do we solve this? How do we look at this, local authority area by local authority area, in order to try and create a streamlined approach, so communities do feel empowered. Developers are aware of land that is suitable for development, and how do we get things moving? Because I feel as though we're hitting another period of stagnation where we're doing nothing. Kevin, sorry, I'll start with you.
Yeah. I think as touched upon, it might be worth having some sort of national database, so that developers and local communities can essentially have a conversation. As you touched upon, they will be getting frustrated because some local authorities have given financial resource to help produce local place plans. Others have, there's officers, community liaison type officers that are engaging with communities to take them forward. And a lot of it has to be driven by local communities as well, but if they don't feel they're getting the support, then they become disenfranchised with planning. Not just local place plans, but the process in general. So I think if developers have the opportunity to speak to them, then they could perhaps help, because there's deadlines for obviously producing local place plans. Yes. If you miss that, it won't be in the local development plan, and that risks damaging community engagement for that area.
No, thank you. Esme or Hazel, any further comments there? No.
Yes.
Hazel? Yes.
No, sorry, I can't see the room. Apologies. Not too much to add. I think I'd like to note that some BEF's members are working with community to develop local place plans. So, for example, Planning Aid Scotland is very active in this area. One organisation, however, they cannot do all the heavy lifting. I think we've also flagged in the past the importance of data. So, to just back to the point previously made, the more data that is available around what buildings are available, what is in local communities, what in local areas, and the more holistic and smart decisions will be able to be made.
Thank you very much again, panel, and perhaps that's a question that we should take to the Minister. So thank you very much again.
Thanks, Megan. Any other comments from members, or indeed any other contributions from our panel members that they would wish to make? I don't see anything, so that concludes the questions from members, and my thanks especially to our witnesses for giving their evidence this morning. So I'll now suspend our meeting briefly to allow you to leave the room before our next item of business. Thank you very much. Hello and welcome back, colleagues. We now turn to item 4 on our agenda, which is to consider the Scottish Public Services Ombudsman Draft Revised Statement of Principles for Complaints Handling Procedures, SPSO 2025-01. The committee has to consider the draft statement and report to Parliament on any views we have. Could I open it up to members to say if they have any comments or they wish to make on the draft revised statement? Megan.
I think it's probably more widely, if I may, in relation to the letter that we received from Mary McIntosh. She's an individual that's certainly from my area, and she was present during the evidence sessions regarding this matter. So, you know, if we approve the revised statement today, does that mean that we will have to send her a response? Because my concern is with that, she has got a bee in her bonnet about this particular issue.
We weren't going to consider Mrs McIntosh's submission to the committee at this point to look at the general principles of the statement, but we could take advice on whether we would bring that forward in another meeting. Jenny, what advice? We can take it again, Megan, and consider that at a future meeting, if that's okay.
Yep.
Okay.
Because I think it's right that we do consider the letter in relation to what we're doing here.
Okay. Any other comments from members? I was particularly happy to see that the whistleblowing principles and child-friendly principles had been added in, but by and large it's wording changes and expressions of how we described this kind of document to the public, which are welcome. But taking on board Megan's comments, could members agree we approve the revised statement and give that notification to the Parliament? Yes. Thank you. And we could delegate that responsibility to the convener when she comes back. Thank you very much. We previously agreed to take our next item in private, so that was the last public item on our agenda for today. That concludes the public part of our meeting, and we'll move into private session. Thank you.